What starts as a normal discussion quickly turns into a tense on-air moment. What happens when a routine conversation on live television takes an unexpected turn, and a normally controlled celebrity finds himself visibly frustrated in front of a daytime audience? That's exactly what unfolded during a tense on-air exchange between Tom Cruise and Sunny Hostin on a panel-style talk show similar to The View. Make sure to subscribe to Table Turn and like and comment for more real talk show coverage. This segment began the way these conversations usually do, with light applause from the studio audience as Tom Cruise walked out, greeted the hosts, and took his seat at the round table. The tone at the start was relaxed and familiar. Cruise was there to promote his latest film project, and the hosts opened with standard questions about the production, the stunt work, and his long-standing reputation for pushing physical limits on screen. He answered comfortably, smiling often, leaning forward slightly as he spoke, occasionally gesturing with his hands as he described filming challenges. The audience reacted warmly, laughing at his anecdotes and applauding when he talked about his appreciation for moviegoers returning to theaters. Sunny Hostin's early questions stayed within that expected range. She asked about the collaborative process with younger actors and about the responsibility Cruise feels as one of the few remaining movie stars who can still open a film globally. Cruise responded thoughtfully, emphasizing teamwork and the importance of respecting the craft. At this point, there was no hint of tension. The hosts nodded along, interjecting with brief affirmations, and the pacing felt smooth, almost rehearsed in the way daytime television often is. The shift began subtly when the conversation moved from filmmaking to broader cultural topics connected to Hollywood. One of the hosts mentioned recent industry debates about representation, accountability, and the role of influential figures in shaping public conversations. Cruise listened quietly, his posture becoming a bit more upright, his smile fading into a neutral expression. Sunny then asked a question that was still calm in delivery but more pointed in substance, referencing Cruise's long career and asking how he sees his responsibility when it comes to addressing controversial issues within the industry. Cruise paused before answering, a pause long enough for viewers to notice, but not so long that it felt awkward. He gave a measured response, saying that he believes his primary responsibility is to his work and to the audiences who support it. He emphasized that he tries to lead by example rather than by commentary. The audience murmured softly, a mix of agreement and curiosity. Sunny followed up, clarifying that she wasn't suggesting he comment on every issue, but asking whether silence from powerful voices can sometimes be interpreted as indifference. At this point, Cruise's tone shifted slightly. He remained polite, but his answers became more deliberate, his words chosen carefully. He explained that he doesn't see silence as indifference, but as respect for complexity, and that he prefers to listen rather than speak impulsively. One of the other hosts attempted to ease the moment by adding a comment about how different celebrities handle public expectations differently. The table laughed lightly, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the conversation might settle back into safer territory. However, Sunny returned to her line of questioning, this time referencing past interviews where Cruise had spoken strongly about certain beliefs. She asked how he reconciles those moments of outspoken conviction with his current preference for restraint. Her tone remained even, but the question carried weight. Cruise leaned back slightly in his chair, crossing his arms briefly before uncrossing them again, a small but noticeable change in body language. He responded by saying that people evolve, that perspectives change with experience, and that he doesn't regret speaking passionately when he believed it was necessary. As he spoke, his voice grew firmer, and his pacing quickened just a bit. The studio audience grew quieter, listening closely. Sunny nodded, but then gently pushed back, suggesting that evolution also includes accountability and reflection. That was the moment when viewers could sense the tension rising. Cruise's jaw tightened, and he leaned forward again, resting his hands on the table. He said that accountability is important, but he took issue with the implication that he owed public explanations for every past stance. His voice was still controlled, but the edge was noticeable. One of the co-hosts attempted to interject, offering a neutral observation about the difficulty of navigating public life over decades, but Cruise continued speaking, finishing his point before yielding the floor. Sunny listened without interrupting, then responded calmly, saying she wasn't questioning his integrity, but highlighting how public figures influence conversations whether they intend to or not. Her tone was steady, professional, and consistent with the show's style. Cruz exhaled audibly, a small gesture that microphones picked up, and he smiled briefly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. The audience reacted with a low murmur, sensing the seriousness of the exchange. As the conversation continued, Cruz reiterated that he values dialogue but resists being framed as a spokesperson for issues beyond his expertise. He spoke more quickly now, his sentences running together slightly, suggesting growing frustration. Sunny maintained her composure, acknowledging his point while restating her perspective. The back and forth remained respectful, but the contrast in energy was clear. Cruz's intensity had increased, while Sunny's steadiness highlighted the tension rather than diffusing it. One of the hosts tried again to lighten the mood, making a brief comment about how passionate discussions are part of what makes the show engaging. The audience laughed softly, grateful for a moment of relief. Cruz smiled again, nodding, but when Sunny offered one final question about the balance between personal boundaries and public accountability, his expression hardened slightly. He responded by saying that boundaries are essential and that without them, meaningful work becomes impossible. His voice rose just a fraction at the end of his sentence, enough for attentive viewers to register it as a loss of his usual calm. The segment ended shortly after, with the moderator thanking Cruz for his honesty and steering the conversation back toward his upcoming film. The applause was polite but subdued compared to the enthusiastic clapping earlier in the segment. Cruz stood, shook hands with the hosts, and exchanged brief smiles, though his demeanor remained serious as he exited the set. In the moments following the broadcast, viewers took to social media to discuss the exchange. Some praised Sunny for asking thoughtful, challenging questions, while others felt Cruz was unfairly pressed on topics unrelated to his work. Clips of the conversation circulated widely, with commentators noting the visible shift in Cruz's body language and tone. Later discussions on the show clarified that the intention was to foster dialogue, not confrontation, and emphasize the importance of respectful disagreement. As the episodes settled into the broader conversation cycle of daytime television, it became another example of how live talk shows can reveal unscripted moments, even with seasoned guests. If you watched the segment, you likely felt the same gradual build of tension, the careful navigation by the hosts, and the subtle but real shift when the discussion touched on deeper issues. Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Table Turn for more narration-based talk show stories. As the cameras returned from a brief commercial break, the atmosphere at the table felt noticeably different, even though the show moved forward as if nothing unusual had happened. This is often how daytime talk television handles moments of tension, by resuming with practiced calm while trusting the audience to sense the undercurrent on their own. Tom Cruise was back in his seat, posture upright, hands folded loosely in front of him. The hosts reintroduced the segment with light banter, but the energy had shifted. The earlier ease was gone, replaced by a more careful pacing that suggested everyone at the table was aware of what had just taken place. The moderator thanked Cruz again for staying with them and gently steered the conversation back toward his current project, mentioning the scale of the production and the film's anticipated release. Cruz responded professionally, offering concise answers about the filmmaking process. His voice was steady, but he spoke more briefly than before, avoiding long anecdotes. The audience applauded politely, though without the same enthusiasm seen earlier. Sunny Hostin listened attentively, nodding as Cruz spoke, her expression neutral and composed. One of the co-hosts asked about Cruz's relationship with longtime collaborators, framing the question around trust and longevity in the industry. Cruz seemed more comfortable here, relaxing slightly in his chair as he talked about consistency and shared values. For a moment, it appeared the segment had fully returned to safer ground. The audience responded with approving murmurs, and a few people clapped as he mentioned loyalty and professionalism. Sunny then entered the conversation again, this time carefully tying her question to what Cruz had just said. She referenced the idea of shared values and asked how those values are tested in an industry that is constantly changing. Her tone was conversational, not confrontational, and she smiled lightly as she spoke. Cruz listened, eyes focused on her, nodding once before answering. He began by saying that change is inevitable and that adaptability is crucial for anyone who wants to last in Hollywood. As he spoke, he gestured gently with one hand, emphasizing balance and perspective. The answer felt measured, almost deliberately so, as if he were choosing his words with extra care. The hosts nodded along, and the audience remained attentive. Sunny followed up by asking whether adaptability also means being open to criticism from audiences and peers. This question, though calmly delivered, subtly reopened the door to the earlier tension. Cruz paused again, this time shorter than before, then answered that criticism is part of the job, but that not all criticism is constructive. He said learning to distinguish between the two is something that comes with experience. His tone was even, but his facial expression tightened slightly as he finished the thought. The moderator quickly stepped in, acknowledging Cruz's point and adding that public figures often face scrutiny that goes beyond their professional work. She framed it as an observation rather than a challenge, an attempt to contextualize the discussion. Cruz nodded, offering a brief smile. Sunny also nodded, signaling agreement, and for a moment, the conversation found a shared footing again. But live television has a way of circling back to unresolved ideas. Sunny gently remarked that audiences sometimes look to familiar figures for reassurance during uncertain times, whether those figures intend to provide it or not. Her delivery remained calm, her hands resting on the table, her posture open. Cruz leaned back slightly, clasping his hands together. He responded by saying he understands that expectation but believes reassurance comes from actions, not statements. His voice was firm, and he spoke a bit faster, as if eager to clarify his position before it could be misinterpreted. The studio audience reacted with a mix of quiet agreement and thoughtful silence. A few heads nodded in the crowd, while others remained still, absorbing the exchange. One of the co-hosts glanced briefly toward the moderator, then added a comment about how everyone at the table brings different perspectives, which is part of what makes the show valuable. The remark earned a small round of applause, signaling audience appreciation for the effort to maintain balance. Cruz smiled politely at the comment, but did not elaborate further. Sunny responded by saying she appreciated his honesty and that respectful disagreement is essential in public discourse. Her tone softened slightly, and she smiled again. Cruz nodded, returning the smile, though his body language remained guarded. His shoulders were squared, and he kept his movements minimal. As the segment continued, questions alternated between film-related topics and broader reflections on longevity and influence. Cruz answered each professionally, but viewers could sense he was staying within carefully defined boundaries. He avoided expansive commentary, sticking to concise responses that left little room for reinterpretation. The hosts, recognizing this shift, adjusted their pacing accordingly, moving briskly from one question to the next. Sunny asked one final question in this portion of the segment, focusing on mentorship and how Cruz approaches working with younger actors. This time, there was no underlying challenge, and Cruz responded more openly, speaking about encouragement, discipline, and respect for the craft. His tone softened, and he even laughed briefly while recounting a moment on set. The audience responded warmly, clapping and laughing along. Still, the earlier tension lingered in subtle ways. When Cruz laughed, it was brief, controlled. When he smiled, it faded quickly. Sunny listened attentively, her expression supportive, but she did not interject further. The moderator thanked Cruz for sharing those insights and signaled that the segment would continue after another break. As the cameras pulled back and applause filled the studio, Cruz leaned toward the hosts, exchanging quiet words and polite smiles. From an audience perspective, it appeared cordial, but restrained. The kind of interaction that suggests professionalism rather than warmth. Sunny nodded as he spoke, her expression calm, offering no indication of lingering disagreement. When viewers watched this unfold live, many could sense that something meaningful had occurred beneath the surface. The conversation never erupted into overt conflict, but the shifts in tone, pacing, and body language told a story of two strong perspectives meeting in real time. It was the kind of exchange daytime television often promises but rarely delivers so clearly. By the time the show cut to commercial, the audience was left reflecting not on any single statement, but on the dynamic itself. Cruz, known for control and precision, had shown flashes of frustration. Sunny, known for thoughtful persistence, had maintained her line of questioning without escalating the moment. The result was a segment that felt authentic, unscripted, and quietly intense, setting the stage for how the conversation would be remembered once the episode aired in full. When the show returned for the next portion of the conversation, the rhythm was noticeably steadier, but the memory of the earlier exchange still hovered over the table. This is something regular viewers of daytime talk shows often recognize, the way a discussion can technically move on while still carrying emotional residue. Tom Cruise sat with his hands folded again, posture straight, eyes attentive but cautious. The hosts resumed with practiced ease, introducing a new angle meant to broaden the discussion without reopening friction too directly. The moderator framed the next question around longevity, noting that Cruise has remained relevant across multiple generations of audiences. It was a neutral observation, delivered with admiration rather than challenge. Cruise responded by acknowledging the support of fans and the importance of staying curious and disciplined. His voice was calm, measured, and steady, suggesting an effort to reset the tone. The audience responded with supportive applause, a familiar and reassuring sound in the studio. One of the co-hosts added a light comment about how Cruise's career spans eras of filmmaking that many viewers remember vividly. Cruise smiled at that, nodding as he spoke briefly about adapting to technological changes in the industry. For a few minutes, the conversation flowed easily, and the earlier tensions seemed to fade into the background. Sunny Hostin listened quietly during this stretch, occasionally nodding, her hands resting on the table, her expression attentive and neutral. As the discussion continued, Sunny re-entered with a question that bridged career longevity and public perception. She asked how Cruise manages the expectations that come with being a familiar face for so long, particularly when audiences feel a personal connection to someone they've watched for decades. Her tone remained conversational, careful not to sound accusatory. Cruise listened closely, maintaining eye contact as she spoke. He answered by saying that expectations are part of the relationship between performers and audiences, but that maintaining authenticity is more important than trying to meet every external demand. He spoke slowly, emphasizing balance and self-awareness. His body language was composed, though his hands tightened slightly as he clasped them together. The audience listened intently, and the studio remained quiet, indicating close attention rather than discomfort. Sunny followed up by noting that authenticity can be interpreted differently by different people, especially in a fragmented media environment. She suggested that what feels genuine to one group might feel evasive to another. Her delivery was thoughtful, almost academic in tone. Cruise inhaled, then responded with a small nod, acknowledging the complexity of that idea. He said that interpretation is out of his control and that he's learned to accept that not everyone will agree with his choices. At this point, the exchange remained calm, but viewers could sense a familiar tightening in Cruise's expression. His answers were still respectful, but shorter now, more contained. One of the co-hosts attempted to broaden the discussion by asking how Cruise disconnects from public life when he's not working. The question was clearly designed to ease the intensity. Cruise responded by talking about personal routines, physical training, and time spent focusing on preparation rather than publicity. The audience chuckled lightly when he joked about always being in some form of training, and the mood briefly lifted. Sunny smiled at the comment, then gently remarked that discipline can be both a strength and a challenge. She asked whether that level of control ever becomes exhausting. The question was softer than earlier ones, framed with empathy rather than critique. Cruise paused, then admitted that it can be demanding, but that structure gives him clarity. His voice softened slightly as he spoke, and for the first time in a while, his shoulders relaxed. The moderator nodded appreciatively and added that many people watching could relate to that feeling, even outside of entertainment. The audience responded with murmurs of agreement. Sunny acknowledged his answer with a nod, and the conversation drifted into a broader reflection on work ethic and personal boundaries. However, as often happens in live discussions, one comment subtly reintroduced tension. Sunny mentioned that boundaries can sometimes be misunderstood by the public as distance or detachment. She clarified that this misunderstanding often fuels criticism. Cruz's expression tightened again, and he leaned forward slightly before responding. He said that misunderstanding is inevitable, but he resists changing his behavior to manage perceptions. His voice grew firmer, and he spoke more quickly, signaling renewed defensiveness. The audience reacted with a quiet shift, some nodding, others sitting back in their seats. One of the co-hosts interjected, saying that maintaining boundaries is something many people struggle with, regardless of profession. The comment seemed intended to normalize Cruz's stance and diffuse any edge. Cruz nodded in agreement, briefly smiling, while Sunny also nodded, signaling alignment on that broader point. The moderator then steered the conversation toward Cruz's preparation for physically demanding roles, highlighting the discipline required at his age. Cruz responded enthusiastically, describing training routines and safety measures. His energy increased noticeably here, and he spoke with confidence and ease. The audience responded warmly, applauding and laughing at moments when he described the intensity of his preparation. Sunny listened attentively, occasionally smiling, and did not interrupt. When she did speak again, it was to compliment his dedication and ask how he ensures safety for himself and others. Cruz answered readily, clearly comfortable on this topic. For several minutes, the exchange felt entirely smooth, almost as if the earlier tension had dissolved. Yet even during these lighter moments, attentive viewers could sense a subtle restraint in Cruz's demeanor. He maintained a careful tone, avoiding anything that might invite deeper scrutiny. Sunny, for her part, appeared content to let the conversation rest in safer territory, offering affirmations rather than challenges. As this portion of the segment drew to a close, the moderator thanked Cruz for his openness and signaled another transition. The applause was stronger than before, suggesting audience appreciation for the steadier tone. Cruz smiled and nodded, thanking the hosts. Sunny returned the gesture with a polite smile, her posture relaxed. From the perspective of someone watching live, this part of the conversation felt like a recalibration. The earlier friction had not disappeared entirely, but it had been managed through careful pacing, respectful listening, and strategic topic shifts. Cruz appeared determined to maintain control, while Sunny balanced curiosity with restraint. The result was a discussion that remained engaging without tipping into overt conflict, leaving viewers aware that something real had occurred, even if it was now being gently smoothed over as the show continued. As the conversation moved into what would become the longest uninterrupted stretch of the segment, the tone settled into something quieter but more deliberate. By now, both the hosts and Cruz appeared keenly aware that every word carried weight, not because the exchange had turned hostile, but because the audience was paying closer attention than usual. This is often what happens after a tense moment on live television. The volume goes down, the pacing slows, and meaning is carried less by what's said and more by how it's said. The moderator opened this portion by acknowledging Cruz's decades-long presence in the public eye, noting that very few figures remain under such consistent scrutiny for so long. It was framed as an observation rather than a question, and Cruz nodded in acknowledgement before responding. He spoke about endurance, about learning when to engage and when to step back, and about understanding that visibility comes with trade-offs. His voice was steady, but more subdued than earlier, suggesting reflection rather than defense. Sunny listened closely, her head tilted slightly as he spoke, signaling attentiveness. When she responded, she did so carefully, saying that longevity also creates a sense of familiarity that can blur boundaries between public and private selves. Her tone was even, and her phrasing deliberate. Cruz took a breath before answering, then agreed that familiarity can complicate expectations, especially in an era where audiences feel closer to public figures than ever before. As he spoke, Cruz kept his hands flat on the table, fingers spread slightly, a posture that suggested grounding. He emphasized that while he understands audience curiosity, he believes some distance is necessary to preserve both personal well-being and professional focus. The audience responded quietly, with a few nods visible in the crowd. There was no applause, just attentive silence. One of the co-hosts then added a comment about how social media has intensified those expectations, making it harder for public figures to control narratives. Cruz agreed, saying that the speed of online reaction often leaves little room for nuance. Sunny followed by saying that nuance is exactly what many viewers hope to see more of in public conversations. Her statement was gentle, but it carried an implicit reminder of the earlier discussion. Cruz shifted slightly in his chair before responding. He said nuance is important, but it's also fragile, and that live commentary can sometimes flatten complex issues. His voice was calm, but firm. This was one of the moments where viewers could sense his frustration returning, not in volume, but in emphasis. He leaned forward, speaking with slightly more intensity, then stopped himself, easing back as he finished his thought. The moderator stepped in smoothly, thanking him for articulating that perspective and remarking that live television itself is an imperfect space for nuance. The audience laughed softly at that acknowledgement, recognizing the truth in it. The laughter eased the tension, and Cruz smiled briefly, exhaling as if relieved by the shared understanding. Sunny nodded in agreement and said that these imperfections are also what make live conversations valuable. She added that disagreement, when handled respectfully, can be productive. Cruz looked toward her and nodded once, saying he agreed with that sentiment. His tone softened again, and for a moment, the earlier edge seemed to dissipate. The conversation then shifted toward the responsibilities of hosts and guests alike in shaping these discussions. Sunny spoke about the role of questioning, framing it as a way to reflect audience concerns rather than challenge individuals. Cruz listened without interrupting, maintaining eye contact. When he responded, he acknowledged the difficulty of that role and said he respected thoughtful questioning, even when it's uncomfortable. This acknowledgement marked a subtle turning point. The dynamic at the table became more collaborative, less adversarial. One of the co-hosts commented that moments of tension often resonate most with viewers because they feel unscripted and honest. The audience responded with light applause, signaling agreement. Cruz smiled at the comment, nodding, while Sunny also smiled, her posture relaxed. Still, traces of strain remained. When Sunny added that honesty can sometimes feel like confrontation to those not expecting it, Cruz's expression tightened slightly. He responded carefully, saying that preparation matters and that unexpected framing can catch anyone off guard. His voice remained controlled, but the words carried personal weight. The moderator acknowledged this by noting that live television rarely allows for preparation in the traditional sense. The comment was delivered lightly, earning a few laughs from the audience. Cruz smiled again, this time more naturally, and nodded in agreement. Sunny laughed softly as well, and the table shared a brief moment of ease. As the discussion continued, Cruz spoke about learning to stay present during uncomfortable conversations rather than retreating from them. This admission stood out to viewers, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt reflective. His voice was quieter now, his pacing slower. The audience listened attentively, some leaning forward in their seats. Sunny responded by saying that staying present is difficult but necessary, especially in public discourse. She thanked Cruz for engaging thoughtfully. He nodded, offering a brief verbal acknowledgement. The exchange felt like a mutual recognition rather than a debate. As this part of the segment approached its end, the moderator summarized the discussion, highlighting themes of responsibility, boundaries, and communication. Cruz listened, hands folded again, his expression neutral but attentive. Sunny nodded along, signaling agreement with the summary. The applause that followed was more sustained than earlier, suggesting that the audience appreciated the measured tone and the effort from all sides to navigate a complex conversation without escalation. Cruz smiled and thanked the hosts, while Sunny returned the smile, her body language open and calm. For viewers watching live, this portion of the segment felt like a gradual unwinding of tension. Nothing had been fully resolved, but there was a sense that both sides had been heard. Cruz appeared calmer, though still guarded, and Sunny appeared satisfied that her questions had been addressed respectfully. The exchange remained firmly within the bounds of daytime television, yet it carried a depth that lingered, setting the stage for how the segment would conclude and how it would later be discussed once the episode ended. As the segment moved into its final stretch, there was a noticeable sense of closure settling over the table. This is a familiar rhythm for viewers of daytime talk shows, the point where conversations begin to gently wind down, even if not every idea has been fully resolved. The moderator glanced briefly toward the camera, then back to the table, signaling that they were approaching the end of the discussion. Tom Cruise sat a bit more relaxed now, shoulders lowered, hands resting calmly in front of him. Sunny Hostin mirrored that calmer posture, her expression open and composed. The moderator thanked Cruise for engaging in what she described as a thoughtful and honest conversation, noting that discussions like this reflect the range of perspectives viewers bring with them every day. Cruise nodded and responded with a brief expression of appreciation, saying he valued the opportunity to talk openly, even when topics are challenging. His tone was even, measured, and notably softer than earlier in the segment. The audience responded with polite applause, signaling recognition of the effort on both sides to keep the exchange respectful. Sunny added a final remark, saying that conversations don't always need to end in agreement to be worthwhile. Her delivery was calm and reflective, consistent with how she had approached the discussion throughout. Cruise looked toward her, nodded once, and agreed, saying that listening is just as important as speaking. This moment felt significant not because it was dramatic, but because it acknowledged the tension without revisiting it. One of the co-hosts then shifted briefly back to Cruise's film, mentioning its release date and thanking him for joining the panel. Cruise smiled, thanking the hosts and the audience. The applause this time was warmer and more sustained, suggesting relief as much as appreciation. From the studio perspective, it felt like a collective exhale, the release of tension that had quietly built earlier in the hour. As Cruise stood to leave, he exchanged brief handshakes and polite smiles with each of the hosts. When he reached Sunny, the interaction was cordial and professional. They shared a short smile and a nod, the kind that communicates mutual respect without overstating it. The cameras captured this moment clearly, and for viewers at home, it signaled that while the conversation had been tense at times, it had not crossed into personal conflict. Once Cruise exited the set, the hosts transitioned smoothly into the next segment. The moderator made a brief comment about the value of respectful dialogue, framing it as something the show strives to model. The audience applauded again, and the show moved on. On the surface, everything returned to normal daytime television pacing, but viewers could sense that the exchange they had just witnessed would linger beyond the broadcast. Almost immediately after the episode aired, clips of the conversation began circulating online. Viewers shared short segments focusing on Cruise's change in tone, his body language during Sunny's questions, and the moments where the discussion grew more serious. Social media responses were divided, though largely measured. Some viewers praised Sunny for asking thoughtful questions and maintaining composure throughout. Others expressed sympathy for Cruise, suggesting that he had been placed in an uncomfortable position on live television. What stood out in the online reaction was the absence of extreme language. Rather than outrage, much of the discussion focused on interpretation. Viewers debated whether Cruise had truly lost his cool, or whether he had simply shown frustration in a rare, visible way. Many noted that his reactions were subtle, pointing to his tightened jaw, shorter answers, and firmer tone rather than any overt outburst. The show itself addressed the moment indirectly in later discussions. In subsequent episodes, hosts referenced the importance of differing viewpoints and reiterated that challenging conversations are part of the format. There was no apology issued and no retraction made, suggesting that the network viewed the exchange as within acceptable bounds of daytime discourse. Sunny, in later commentary, emphasized that her questions were intended to reflect audience curiosity, not provoke confrontation. Cruise did not publicly comment on the exchange in detail, which aligned with the boundaries he articulated during the segment. His promotional appearances continued as scheduled, and when asked about media scrutiny in later interviews, he kept his answers general, focusing on work rather than commentary. For many viewers, this consistency reinforced the perspective he had shared on the show. Looking back at the full segment as it aired, what made it memorable was not a single line or dramatic moment, but the gradual build and release of tension. It unfolded the way real conversations often do, especially on live television, with moments of discomfort, attempts to redirect, and eventual resolution without complete agreement. The hosts managed the discussion carefully, Cruz navigated it with visible effort, and Sunny maintained her line of questioning without escalating the tone. For the studio audience, the experience was likely one of attentiveness rather than shock. Their reactions throughout, the quiet moments, the polite applause, and the brief laughter, reflected engagement rather than alarm. For viewers at home, the segment offered a reminder that daytime talk shows can still produce unscripted, meaningful exchanges when differing perspectives meet in real time. As the conversation continued to be discussed online, many viewers noted that it felt authentic precisely because it wasn't perfectly smooth. The pauses, the shifts in posture, and the careful phrasing all contributed to a sense that what they were watching was real, not rehearsed. In that sense, the segment fulfilled one of the core promises of live television, showing people thinking, reacting, and adjusting in the moment. In the end, the episode didn't redefine Tom Cruise's public image, nor did it radically alter the show's approach. Instead, it added one more example to the long history of daytime television moments where conversation briefly slips out of predictable territory and into something more revealing. Those are often the moments audiences remember, not because they are explosive, but because they feel honest. Now that you've heard the full breakdown, share your opinion in the comments and let us know how you interpreted the exchange. And don't forget to subscribe to Table Turn for more narration-based talk show stories that walk you through what really happened on live television.